Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now back in the days when my first gaming PC was a potato and I looked like one, the idea of upscaling games using DLSS and FSR were probably just an idea in someone's notepad. If we wanted better performance then we'd have to turn the resolution down. Personally I could only dream of playing at 1080p, and while 720p was easily achievable even with my very modest specs, it was 900p that I and many others often settled on as a sort of budget sweet spot. These days, enabling an aforementioned upscaling technique such as FSR, which is often implemented in most new games, is especially helpful to older and weaker cards, offering a boost in performance with less of a visual sacrifice. After finding an old 900p monitor in the back of my cupboard today though, I couldn't help but wonder what we could expect in modern games when using a card that can struggle in 2023 and one that is quite starved of VRAM. This is where the 3GB 1050 comes in. It's worth remembering that this card is going to struggle anyway in 2023. It was a fantastic budget card when it came out, but time has taken its toll, as it usually does. Happens to the best of us. That said, it can still muster up a perfect 30 FPS in Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p with the low settings, and while it looks and seems a bit empty and lifeless, similar to my ex-girlfriend's soul, this game is kind of playable. Dropping to that old sweet spot of 900p boosts our average by 6 frames per second, which sounds like not very much, but this is a 20% increase. And when you're teetering on the line of playability, to quote a popular UK supermarket, every little helps. Red Dead 2 also runs at 1080p on the 3GB 1050, and while the most popular and available version of this card was the 2GB model, the 3GB one is definitely handy to have in 2023. That extra memory is very useful. With the high textures, medium TAA and everything else turned down, we got 37 FPS, which beats the console experience no matter the platform. I think the Xbox One runs it at 800 and something p, so let's drop down to 900 and see what happens. It's a boost of almost 10 FPS to the average here, and while it may not look as good as an Xbox One in terms of settings, it's a smoother experience, especially as those percentile lows are once again increased. Star Wars Jedi Survivor is, well, it does run. I mean, it's sort of tolerable if you are very desperate, but we just don't have the VRAM or the power to push much past 20 FPS. I mean, we'd be lucky to hit that in all fairness, but it's a good effort. I will reiterate that you should definitely enable FSR where possible with a card like this, as you could enable a really intensive preset and still get a visually acceptable experience. But let's see what our old forgotten friend 900p has to say about this. Here is Jedi Survivor in all its 1600 by 900 glory. Magnificent. It's a 2 FPS increase across the board, bringing our average up to a whopping 19. The difference between 17 and 19 doesn't sound like much, but here in the UK, it's the difference between getting served in a pub and not. So keep that in mind. SpiderMan at 1080p blew me away with its surprising performance attempt today, 40 FPS at low. What's even more impressive is that the 1 and 0.1% numbers are fairly solid as well. Who'd have thought that this old card could still manage such a feat? So what happens when we turn things down? Well, it's 8 extra frames for the average, 3 for the 1% low, and for some reason the 0.1% low number has gone down. Yeah, not sure what happened there, but it's an improvement overall. If you have a 900p monitor and a low budget, then you shouldn't be too worried about trying to play modern games. Finally then, it's Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. This also has FSR, which should be used for sure, but where we're going we don't need FSR. Well, we do, that's a lie, but we don't want FSR, I should say. Not this time around. At 1080p, COD does alright, though the 0.1% figure does hint at some issues here and there. So what about 900p? Well, it's a 35% uplift in performance from 37 FPS to 50 on average, and that makes all the difference here. If my calculations are correct, of course. Probably not. We've also got a boost of 9 FPS to the 1% low and 21 extra frames to that 0.1% number. A true game changer. But there we go, 900p revisited. The old sweet spot could still save an old graphics card, especially if you don't want to use FSR, or maybe you have a card that doesn't support it, which could also be the case. Take the 700 series for example. Those cards still work, albeit without modern driver support, but enabling FSR may cause black screens. This is where good old native 900p will really save the day, and the only reason I didn't feature the 780 here as the main card in this video was because compatibility with modern games can be rather hit or miss. Cards that don't work with FSR sometimes don't work with modern games either, so even if you wanted to play at a lower res, you couldn't. Seems like we can't win either way with some hardware. If you have a low graphics card budget though, and end up with something like a 960, 1050 or RX 550 to name a few, it's still worth keeping 900p in mind, especially as you can pick up some dirt cheap second-hand 900p monitors on eBay. There's one just up the road from me, in fact, for £5. It's not ideal in 2023, of course not, but it is still an option, and one that is probably less thought about since the arrival of upscaling methods. That's all for this one then. You may be able to tell it's been a pretty slow day here, waiting on some hardware to arrive, but I hope you've enjoyed this one nonetheless. If you did, leave a like, leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you game at 900p, of course, down below in the comments section. Subscribe to the channel if you want to, and you haven't done so yet, of course, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next video.